All right. Well, this is way more work than I anticipated. I thought we'd have like 10 people throughout the day. No, this is awesome. So I want to say thanks for everybody for coming out. I know it's a busy time of year. Lots going on. So to be here on holiday, appreciative. My name is Eric Hemenway. I'm a tribal historian, director of archives and records for the local tribe here, for Little Traverse Bay Band of Odawa Indians. So there's 12 federally recognized tribes in Michigan, one of them being right here in Emmett County. So the tribal seat is in Harbor Springs, but all of Emmett County is our homelands. So I want to talk a little bit about today with trees. A tig is tree in our language, but before I get started, I want to give an introduction in my Odawa language. It helps me quite a bit when I try to focus my thoughts and where I want to go with my talk. And I do a lot of talking nowadays, but one of my mentors said, don't ever prepare a talk. You just got to feel it, because if you start thinking about it, you're going to lose track. So I try to do that as much as possible, but speaking the language helps out a lot. So Ginebik Indiznakas, Anamatika Mekandonjaba, Anishinaabe, Odawa Endau, and Jijik Dodem, Jinage Archives and Records for the Waganuxing Odawa Mapi, Miigwech everybody to Ambe here, let's say Makwazibing, and Miigwech for this Minigo Gijigat, Miigwech for the Gijate Gijigat, Nangwa, Hawa. So one of my names, I have multiple names but not multiple personalities, is Ginebik, the snake. So I use that for public use. So being in a swamp, I like it because that's where my namesake is. So Ginebik is one of my Odawa names. Eric Hemenway is my English name. And I self-identify as an Anishinaabe Odawa. And I always give the disclaimer, you can have 10 natives up here. And they're going to give you 10 different answers on how they self-identify, and they're all correct. American Indian, Native American, Indigenous, Aboriginal, Odawa, yada, yada, yada. I don't speak on behalf of anybody but myself. Because I get this all the time. Like, well, I talked to this one Native guy, and I'm like, well, you didn't talk to all of us, but that's what happens. So I self-identify as Anishinaabe, and the Odawa, Odawa, Ojibwe, Chippewa, and Potawatomi all make up the Anishinaabe. We are one of the indigenous peoples to the Great Lakes. We're not the only indigenous people, but we've been in this area for thousands of years, right here. This is my homeland for thousands of years, and we never left, which I think is a really remarkable story, because Native Americans today make up 1.5% of the population. That's it. So as we're gearing up for 4th of July, not my favorite holiday. I'll just be very honest. So to come here and educate, it's a better way for me to spend the holiday. But we're 1.5%. We're the smallest minority in this country, and that's a big number when you consider in 1492 we were 100% of the population on this continent. So that number in itself says a lot. So with us as Odawa people, we've been here for thousands of years, and people ask me, how do you know you've been here that long? Part of my job for the tribe here for the last 20 years is working under repatriation, returning people from museums, ancestral human remains. So that's all I did for about 7 years. And the oldest person I've ever returned and reburied was over 3,000 years old. And they're from Mackinac Island. So people ask me, what's the evidence? I go, well, I'm in front of you, I'm the evidence. But if you need more evidence, I tell this story that we got this person back. And when we were working with the parks, they go, Eric, this is a really old person. How do you know 3,000 years ago you were here? Well, based on our traditions, our heritage, our stories, that's how I know. And also the environment. You know, all these trees and the landscape we're part of. And like when I say on Matikamek, place of the prayer tree, that's my home, Cross Village. But learning my language, it was really critical because the identity of that place is more known to me. So you go to Cross Village today, there's a big cross, and there's a Polish restaurant. And so I meet people from all over the state, like, oh, Legs In. I'm like, no, we're not talking about Legs In. Onomatikamak, place of the prayer tree, goes back thousands of years for us. And the story I was told is that a powerful spirit bent a pine tree and made it the place of the prayer tree. So when the spirit bent the tree, it made the area sacred. That's completely different than the Jesuits coming in and planting a giant cross. So learning my language, I was able to like really find the meaning of my home. And this area is also known as Waganuxing. Between Cross Village and Harbor Springs on the shore, it's also called the Tunnel of Trees. But the original name is Waganuxing, land of the crooked tree. And it's referring to that bent tree. That's how sacred it was. So you'll see the name Crooked Tree on Crooked Tree Breadworks, Crooked Tree Art Center. There's a golf course called Crooked Tree. So that name is still here. The branding is still there. But the original name stems from that tree. And there's also bent trees over by Bay Shore, Charlevoix. So there's a very sacred place over by Charlevoix called Green Sky Hill Church. And Green Sky Hill has actually bent trees that we bent over 150 years ago to mark a sacred council area. So we bent the trees along with the spirits, part of Waganuxing, land of the crooked tree. So those trees are still there. You can still see them from the side of the road. And I've been kind of talking with my historian peeps, like this is an actual World Heritage Site at this point. Like it's got the trees, it's got the old burial grounds, and then the story behind how we avoided Indian removal. So the federal government had a law called Indian removal in the 1830s. And they were pushing out thousands, tens of thousands of Native people to Oklahoma and Kansas. And we talk about the Cherokee Trail of Tears in schools, but there are over 40 different Trail of Tears where people were removed and they suffered quite a bit. We were targeted for removal in 1838. We sent scouts out to Kansas. That's where they wanted to put us. No offense to Kansas, anybody from Kansas, but it's not Michigan. Our scouts went to Kansas, came back, and they said, the first thing they said, there's no trees, there's no water. We will not survive. So how are we going to make it? How are we going to make it into future generations? So they decided that we need to make an agreement with the federal government called a treaty, a nation-to-nation agreement. So my ancestors, in the November of 1835, made a birch bark canoe, because birch bark is awesome, and they made houses, they made canoes, they made containers. So they made a canoe out of birch bark, which we've been doing for thousands of years, and they got in that canoe in November of 1835. They left Harbor Springs, and they paddled all the way to Washington, D.C. Got there in December. Usually you don't travel that late in the year for obvious reasons, but they had to because the stakes were so high. If you don't go make the agreement, they're just going to push you out. And you're going to have to walk all the way to Kansas, and probably half your tribe's going to die. So what do? You take action, and the way they did this is through these trees. They said this tree is going to operate as a vehicle to get us to this place. We're going to make this agreement nation to nation, which they did. And without them doing that, I would probably be standing in Kansas talking about the day we got removed. But that's not the case. And largely because of that wigwas, that birch tree that was helping us. And so that's also part of the story. It's not just a natural resource. You know, it's a cultural resource. It's a resource that helps you out. And so when I would go out harvesting with my mom, she would say, there's another word I want you to learn, and that's Ninandoy Maganuk, all my relations. So when you go out into the woods, you say that, and that gives you permission to go out into that space. And she would also say, people are very pitiful. You know, we need everything. You know, trees can make it on their own, animals can make it on their own, but people need all this stuff. And in the order of the creation, it was plants, animals, people last. And that's scientifically how it is. So you give your respects to your elders, she would say. Those plants have been here a really long time. And don't pick too much you don't need. You know, I'd be in the woods like these little people, and, you know, I'm hitting trees with sticks. They're like, don't, that's your family. Don't hurt your tree. So those things are still being taught as we go into the woods. My mom's starting to slow down a little bit. She's still pretty militant, still pretty fiery. So we still go out and harvest, and it's the same things. You know, saying those same things, going in, making sure we don't take too much, because future generations are going to need that. And our trees are sick right now. There's a tree that's very significant to the Odawa, and that's black ash. And we make baskets out of it. And there's a little bug called the emerald ash borer that's killing all of our black ash trees. It's 99% killed all the trees. But there's some trees who are holding out on Beaver Island and the islands. So hopefully they can come back. So we have to be good stewards. And the black ash are getting sick. Other trees have gotten, the beech have gotten sick, you know, and they're, you know, taking a hit. And as I was taught, you know, what happens to the environment happens to us. And that's funny, you know, we go through a pandemic. and people are getting sick. Well, our environment's been sick too. So we try to, realize that equilibrium with our environment. But I encourage you to go back to Harbor Springs in November, stand on that beach, and think about, okay, do I have it in me to paddle for 6 weeks? And there's no McDonald's, there's no Myers. Like, you're taking food that you prepared, and a lot of this food came from maple trees, maple sugar. So the trees are providing food, fuel, shelter, tools, cultural resources. It's everything. So I'm really grateful to be here and stand in this area with my family. I want to say it's not just this thing we cut down and don't think about. These I've heard the birds. They call the trees their homes. All the critters, raccoons, possums, squirrels. The trees are their homes. So it's a home for a lot of other Ninandaway Maganak, a lot of other relations. So with that, so I'll end with the story of the birch. So a lot of times when we go harvest, there will be cultural stories about what you're doing. So as a young person, I was not the best harvester, I'll be honest. Kind of hated it. Bugs, sweaty, but that's just how it went. So one day we're out harvesting birch bark, which is a lot of work. You start peeling bark off a tree and hauling it out to the car, you're working. So before we got started one day, my mom's like, okay, I'm going to tell you the story of the birch tree. I'm like, okay. She goes, a long time ago, the birch tree was perfectly white. It was so perfectly white, it would actually shimmer and sparkle when the sun hit it. And it became very vain. It became very arrogant, like, look at me, I sparkle. And look at you, birch tree, you're all, or pine tree, you're all rough and you're all, ugly looking. And basswood tree, jingwok, pine tree, ninneatig, maple tree, you got coarse, rough bark. You're not beautiful like me. So all the other trees started to get fed up with the birch tree. Like, you're just too vain, you're talking about yourself and boasting. Yeah, you sparkle, big deal. Then one day, this powerful entity was going through the forest, and one of the trees grabbed the entity and said, you got to do something about the birch. This tree is out of control. All day I hear about how good looking it is. It had it. So this entity said, okay, we'll do something. So the entity goes by the birch tree and automatically, look at me, I'm beautiful. You're not even beautiful. And for days it goes on. Finally, this entity who has immense power said, okay, time for a lesson. So he grabbed a stick and he started hitting the tree. And he's like, ouch, look, you just left a mark. He goes, oh yeah? And he kept hitting the tree, hitting it, until it became like this, marked up, imperfect. And the birch tree at the end said, look, you've made me so ugly and imperfect. And the entity said, no, now you are completely perfect, because you're going to be more useful than any other tree. You can make canoes, you can make shelter, it's an awesome fire starter, you can make containers. You're going to be more useful than almost any other tree. Well, you got to learn the lesson of humility first, because none of us are above anybody else. We all are for the greater good of the community. So my mom's telling me this, and I'm like, 7, and I just want to run and hide, and but about humility and giving back. Yeah. So you might look at a birch tree and say, hey, you're pretty gnarly, but you think of all these things a birch tree can do. And one of my favorite people in the world is Yvonne Walker-Kijik. She's an elder. Phenomenal artist. She makes boxes out of the bark of the tree, and she sews pictures onto the box out of porcupine quills. And her work is all over the world. She's actually the best at what she does. And she fed her family for decades making these boxes. She would make a box a day sometimes. And her work is highest demand. And she's the most humble person. It just reminds me of the tree. Like, her work is in the Smithsonian, it's in Vienna, it's in London, all over the world. She's recognized that the best is what she does, which is, it's hard to say, somebody is like, they're literally the best at what they do. And she's an artist, but the most humble person. And when my mom got involved with the tribe years ago, and this is before we had federal recognition and casinos and resources, we were pretty poor back then. There was poor and Indian poor. We were Indian poor. And my mom, she didn't know a lot of people, and she's really young single mom. And Yvonne took her in right away, like, you're a community. We look out for each other. just like the teaching of that birch tree. You're always looking out. So there's a lot that can be, tied in with your trees in your community. So I want to say miigwech, thanks for coming out. And as one of my elders told me, miigwech sort of means thank you. And as he also said, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. I go, yep, that's how anatomy works on us. And he goes, you should be listening twice as much as you're talking. I go, ooh, that's a good one. I like that. He goes, it's time to use the ears, Eric. I go, okay. He goes, miigwech, and the way he was taught means, I am grateful for all that you have given me. That means more to me. You have given me your time, your attention. You've made, been engaged. You haven't been on your phone. You've been present. So I want to say miigwech for that. And I guess I'm ready for some hot dogs too.
Thanks so much, Eric.
Thank you.
That was great.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming out.